What's up, everyone? Welcome. We are live right now on CannaBuzz, and if you're joining us on YouTube, Spotify, or the podcast universe, thank you so much for joining us today. We have a great episode. We have Brandon from Future Compounds. We're going to be talking all about cannabinoids today. If you're not familiar with Future Compounds, we've done episodes with them in the past. I really love their 50/50 gummies. It's CBD CBG, 150 milligrams in each gummy. None of that 10 milligram BS that you find at the dispensary. This is solid stuff. So we're going to be talking about the real shit today, and we're going to have a really great interview. JR's put together some really great questions. But before we get too far into it, I need to make a couple shout outs. First off, shout out to everyone in the CannaBuzz community. You can see at the bottom of the screen there in the middle of the page, if you go to cannabuzz.app in your browser, or if you're on iOS, you can download the iOS app. And you can join us in the Cannabinoids community. It's our members-only community where you can join us for these live interviews, and we do giveaways and all sorts of things. If you want to support the channel, join us over there, Cannabuzz, and use the code BUZZ for your first month free. There's the chat there on JR's screen. And then we're also going to shout out sacred3mushrooms.com. If you want to grow your own mushrooms at home, edible or otherwise, you can go to sacred3mushrooms.com. You can find your own grow kits there for about $80 or so. Everything you need. He's got links to everything else that you would need all there at sacred3mushrooms.com. And you can use the code CannaBuzz for a discount. And then last shout out from me is going to go to lostcoastplanttherapy.com. If you want to use an organic IPM spray at home or outside in the grow, check out Lost Coast Plant Therapy. Make sure to give Dirk a shout out and thanks for supporting CannaBuzz. And then I'm going to throw it over to JR. Make sure to, there you go. I'm going to throw it over to JR and we'll be good to go.
All right, Q, thanks. I'm going to keep these super brief because we've got a lot of really good content to cover with Brandon. So first of all, for the Tiki announcements, he's doing 40% off his entire site, plus a free pack, a yacht rack at tikiseeds.com. Brad's got an Izumo that he just released, which is Ghost OG by Ziggy Guy. He's really into the Japanese anime and culture, and so a lot of his strain names are getting very difficult for me to pronounce. But anyways, hit up rawgenetics.io. This Ghost OG by Ziggy Guy is definitely going to be a OG leaning, very delicious strain.
Awesome. Well, like I said at the top of the show, today we are joined by Brandon Allen from Future Compounds. Like I said, Future Compounds, if you look them up right now, you're going to find a lot of great CBD, CBG products, including isolate, so you can make your own products.
Oh, yeah.
We're super excited to have Brandon on the show. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. That was a energetic intro. You got me going here. I like it. and I couldn't help but to laugh with your mispronunciation of Japanese names because I do it almost every single day. And in case anyone's curious why I'm surrounded by knives, I was able to turn two of my passions into careers, one being cannabis and another being my fascination for knives. So on top of working with Future Compounds, I do cutlery content for various companies. So yeah, Honeski, Honsuki, Kuritsuke, the names are so I'm like, hey, I'm from New Jersey. I don't know how to say this shit. Just know how to use it. That's more important to me. So yeah, I can feel that pain.
Well, excellent. Brandon, one of the things we always love to do when we get new guests on is we ask them how they fell in love with the plant and how it's helped get them where they are today.
Yeah, well, I kind of alluded to that already, which is a good little segue there. I'm going to be honest. I just enjoyed getting high for most of my teen into my 20s. And I went to culinary school late in life. I was 28 the week that I started with the goal of going to school to learn how to cook properly so I could then take that and put it into another aspect of working a career, whatever it may be, because I have a really messed up back, knees, wrist, everything you can imagine. So working the line for 40 years was just not in the cards for me. And my now wife, girlfriend at the time, was a traveling nurse for about 8 years that we were together. We're still together. And with that, we ended up in California in the end of it was August of 2016. got there on a Friday, got my med card on Monday. And I believe it was that week that I was looking around and seeing all the things that were happening in the industry. Because like when you grow up in Jersey and Pennsylvania, you don't consider California and the world that it was even back then. It's very different now in different states, but it was very odd to be walking by a dispensary or walking down Venice Beach and having people say, "Hey, come on in, we'll give you a med card. It's $40," and smelling weed everywhere. So it was very new, it was very cool, and I saw an opportunity. So went from I like getting high, I saw an opportunity to take my culinary skill set and apply it to that. So I started doing cannabis education, cooking type of videos on Instagram. Next thing you know, I got tagged in a post for the High Times Top Cannabis Chef competition through them and
Whoa.
Magical Butter, which I ended up getting into. I was the only chef in the lineup that didn't come from the industry or have any, my fingers, my hands somewhere in it. And I ended up winning. And so my culinary school background, I did an apprenticeship with a chef on the Olympic culinary team. So I competed and took that, got to do it in the competition. So now I get this like funny made up title as like the first ever top cannabis chef. And they kind of put me on the map. And in that and expanding on social media and doing these dinners and kind of developing my name, so to speak, in the industry. With that, I was really focused on the research side of things. Now, I'm a chef by trade. I have no other formal education, but I've got OCD, and when I can dial it into something, it's a good thing. And I did that with the cannabis science side of things. And what I found were all the lies that I was being sold by these companies, especially about dosing, about terpenes, about how these things actually affect us. It's so easy to boop, boop, boop into Google and type in, can THC does this? And you find a study that says THC kills cancer cells. And now everyone's saying THC kills cancer cells. And it's like, that happened in a test tube, in a Petri dish. That doesn't mean by lighting it on fire and smoking it that it's going to cure your cancer. So I then shifted from, like getting high, see an opportunity, to now I have a mission to provide people with the best possible knowledge that I can without caring about how they feel about it. It's facts over feelings type of perspective. I've gone against the grain. I've pissed in the wind. I've pissed a lot of people off by doing so. And that's that. Then I end up meeting Dustin. Then I end up meeting Kyle with Future Compounds and realize that we were all aligned with wanting people to know the proper information. And that's that. And the last thing I'll say is for about 5 years, I also ran Trichome Institute. It's a cannabis education company. We train dispensary staff and consumers alike. I left at the end of 23, but for 5 years, I created online curriculum around cannabis. So was really dialed in from, doing the research, writing, being in the videos, et cetera. Not much going on with Trichome Institute anymore. And then right around that same period, I went with Future Compounds, and there's my background. That's the nitty gritty, and I'll stop there.
Yeah, I followed you on Instagram like a couple months ago or so, and so I've been enjoying your content. One of the pieces that I enjoyed, to your point earlier about kind of sussing out what's real and what's not real, is you had a post a couple weeks ago about sativa or indica gummies and how that's like bullshit basically. And I appreciated that you were and I was asking you questions and you were responding, and I appreciated that you were putting that out there. Listeners or viewers of the show may remember that we talked to a colleague of yours from Future Compounds some months back, 6 months or a year ago. Time flies. But let us know, what's your position at Future Compounds? What are you up to at the company? We'd just love to get that kind of background as well.
Basically, it's funny because we all do a lot of different things with a small company, but I am in marketing. I am doing the social media. I'm writing the blogs. I'm writing website content. I've helped with packaging, concept designs for new products. I mean, I've done it all, but for the most part, my day-to-day is social media, and writing blogs and, doing outreach and things like this. So that would basically be it. It's hard to put a title. Like, I think my official title for a while was Chief Shenanigans Officer or Chief Officer of
Ooh,
Shenanigans or something like that.
that's really
Because
good.
like we're just having fun. Our goal is we want to give people potent doses of CBD that mirror the research and aren't just bamboozled snake oil nonsense that is ripping them off. So the tone of our social media, I do memes, I make fun of myself, I make fun of the industry a lot. I poke the bear, and our branding, our marketing is all just like very different. It's not like hippy dippy wellness, like peace, love, happiness. It's like dark and bold and masculine. And we kind of say in house, like, we're unapologetically potent, and it's not just our doses, it's kind of us as a whole as well. And there you go.
Yeah, I know. I appreciate it because you kind of along those lines, you talk about how to fit this stuff into your life. And I was mentioning to you the other day how the CBD CBG helps me, kind of stay calm and focused, things like that. So I really appreciate that. Well, our next question, to kind of jump into JR's
Sure.
content, and now my dogs are going to freak out behind me, is the next question is, what are cannabinoids exactly?
Yes. And for those of you who can't see, I have 4 pages of questions and my notes that I put together. I asked JR, I was like, could you just send me a couple talking points so I know what the goal is? And I got this email with like 30 some questions. And at first I was like, holy crap. And that's a lot to cover. And I was like, okay, well, wait a minute. These are also mindfully put together. So thank you for doing that. It's great. So I put notes together because I want to make sure that I answer all of your questions. I can talk about this stuff off the top of my head, but it's best to sometimes have a couple things to keep me dialed in because I can easily squirrel. So what exactly are cannabinoids? Cannabinoids are phytochemicals, so plant-based chemicals that are found in cannabis. And these compounds have the ability to interact with various types of receptors throughout our central and peripheral nervous system. And the reason I say interact is because it's not all like a lock and key. People hear about CB1 and CB2 receptors and how THC comes in and it docks on the receptor and lights things up and turns things on. In a lot of cases with different cannabinoids, they don't do that at all. They interact differently in various ways that then can influence certain receptors. And with that, we also have endogenous cannabinoids. So cannabinoids that live within our body that are produced on demand. Now, the cannabinoids that we know of from the cannabis plant were given that name first, and then our endogenous molecules that work similarly to those cannabinoids were then discovered. I mean, we're looking many years apart in the discovery of our endocannabinoid system. So today we call them endocannabinoids, but if it wasn't for the cannabis plant, they'd probably just be called like neurotransmitter receptors or something along those lines. So don't think of it necessarily that they were cannabinoid names beforehand. We've had these things well before cannabis was even a plant, and coming from millions of years of evolution, all the way, I think, back to a lobster or something like that, that has CB or cannabinoid receptors.
Yeah, and I was always told like one of the endocannabinoids that is produced is in a woman's breasts, and it creates that sensation for an infant to suckle. And so I think that, kind of that therapeutic connection with our own endocannabinoid systems at birth kind of maybe might steer us in the direction of enjoying the cannabinoids from the mother plant.
It's possible. I've heard that as well, and when it comes to a lot of the claims with cannabis, I always take it with a grain of salt. It's a fun way to think that, oh, some of the first things we ever consumed include endocannabinoids, but those cannabinoids are in that baby and released on demand well before it gets its first suckle. It's happening inside the baby in the womb. So our endocannabinoid system is an on-demand type of system. So it produces various types of cannabinoid or endocannabinoids and cannabinoid-like compounds. So anandamide is what you're referring to, but there's also 2-AG, which is 2-arachidonyl glycerol for you nerds out there. And so they're the most dominant, but there's other cannabinoid-like compounds that essentially then our body essentially breaks them down, and then they're created again when we need them. Now in breast milk, and my wife is 5 or 6 weeks out from being due with our first baby. Breast
Wow,
milk has
congratulations.
thank you. Breast milk has a bunch of stuff in it. And yes, endocannabinoids are also a part of that.
Awesome. Sorry about that, guys. My internet connection blipped there, so I missed
You're
the
good.
next question. So, let's see. So, talk us through. I mean, this is kind of a common thing that we've heard in our community, including myself, where we may use cannabinoids to help us with our mental health. Can you talk to us about how cannabinoids may interact with that experience or
Yes.
system?
Yep. So cannabinoids interact with various types of cells and receptors. So you've got your CB1 and CB2 receptors. They do a lot in the sense of the cascade of effects and the neurotransmitter release and all the things that they can influence. There's also other G protein coupled receptors, which is this giant family of receptors. There's over 800 of them, and they're one of the most studied receptor types that there are in the human body. And it just happens that the CB receptors are in that family. So in addition to CB1 and CB2, there are other receptors that are endogenous cannabinoids as well as cannabis-based cannabinoids do interact with. So then you have TRP receptors, PPAR receptors. There is A2A. There is various types of hormones. Let's see what else. We've got FA and MAGL, which are enzymes that interact with these receptors. You've got GABA, then there's ghrelin, leptin, cortisol, insulin, estrogen, testosterone, progesterone, growth hormone, prolactin, epinephrine. There's a lot going on with the consumption of a single isolated cannabinoid, let alone when you're consuming multiple. So with that, can cannabinoids positively affect someone's mental health? Yes. Can they negatively affect someone's mental health? Yes, absolutely. Because as the reason I went through and listed all of those things, if someone's GABA is really low and someone else's GABA is really high, but their serotonin's really low, and they're just out of balance, but out of balance in a different way than someone else, it could make things worse. So what we found with CBD based off of the studies, and I'm talking, when I say a study, I mean human studies that are done either with at least a placebo or it's in a clinical trial, which would include a placebo, but a much larger scale and longer term type of thing. And the research has shown that for anxiety, which is a very vague thing to say. It's like saying food, because your anxiety is different than mine, different than theirs. And a lot of times it's not anxiety, it's something else that's the root cause promoting the anxiety. That's what I get with OCD. So CBD in the research, 300 to 600 milligrams on average per dose, seems to be a sweet spot to help a lot of people with anxiety. One of the big things that they test for would be for public speaking. That's a real common thing, or just going over like I forget what it's specifically called, but the test, all the questions and how they rank them of how CBD could help reduce it. Huge. And on the flip side, you've got people who smoke THC or dab or do edibles or have some type of the intoxicating effect of THC in them, and that helps them with their anxiety. I smoked weed for 20 some years. In 2018, the long story short, I was doing an experiment with a doctor in my house. It was over a quarter of like a couple of months with these different things. And I won't go into all the details, but I ended up having a really bad experience on the last test that we did, to the point that I passed out. My blood pressure dropped terribly, and I couldn't like come back to it. And that was the awakening of my adult anxiety that has lasted since. So I had a terrible experience, and it created extreme anxiety. I stopped listening to it, and I kept smoking and kept trying edibles and trying to find a sweet spot. And I could not find it without just having a complete meltdown of a panic attack with the lightest amount of THC, even getting high off of a hemp joint, like super low. I'm not talking these hemp joints you can buy now that are 12% THCA or 15% THCA, like we can get here in Tennessee. I'm talking like real low THC, smoke that, totally, absolutely anxious. So for me, THC seemed to have exasperate something that was being suppressed without it. And so I now can't even touch THC without going into a complete fucking, it's terrible. I wouldn't wish it on anyone.
That's not terribly uncommon.
No.
I've had several friends who have been, like you said, 20, 30 years in. They get a hold of some strange, it sends them into a panic attack. And then they just, every time they even take the slightest puff, it brings them right back to that.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, my brother and his wife, they grow giant, tremendously beautiful plants, and they cut every bit of it up and use it for topical because of their sensitivity to smoking, but yet they're still getting all of the benefits of the topical without that,
Yep.
And so I don't think that that's a terribly uncommon experience. I do have friends who just kind of plowed through it, bro, and just kept smoking and smoking until they could get that tolerance back up. But man, it can be really rough. It was like that for my wife when she had our kids, when she was pregnant with our second child. Her chemistry just did not mix well, and she couldn't touch cannabis for like 25 years. Because it would just do the same thing, kind of send her into this this induced thing. And I introduced her to a CBD variety because she had terrible problems with bone and joint stuff. And through the CBD, she got to a 1-to-1, got from the 1-to-1 to the regular, and now she's a dab queen. She's right back where she was. But it took literally 25 years to get back to that point. And so I don't think that's a terribly uncommon experience.
It's not.
One
it's
thing
not. The longer I'm in the industry, the more people I meet that have gone through the same thing. Kyle with Future Compounds, he can't touch it either. Dustin obviously can, and many others that we know. But yeah, it's not uncommon. What I can tell anyone who's watching or listening, if you're that person and you keep pushing and you keep pushing, you don't listen to your body, you're going to end up in a bad spot, like where you're describing, where I've gone through, where you just can't even touch it. So less can be a lot more, and you'll be able to enjoy it longer. I hope I can enjoy it again someday because I miss it.
Yeah. And so now, as we're kind of moving on with some of the therapeutic values, the neurodegenerative avenue seems to be something that people are really honing in on. We've always seen that famous video, the guy with Parkinson who just puts a little bit of oil under his tongue, and then within 10 minutes, he's not tremoring anymore. So can you kind of speak to the neurodegenerative healing properties?
I wish I could speak to it more because I would love to be able to say this, this, and this, but the research is lacking. Yes, we have videos and there's anecdotal evidence of how it's helping with things like tremors, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and even like, what are they referring it to now as neurodivergent disorders, ADD, ADHD, things like that. To the best of my knowledge, there's not a ton of research. They have been showing that CBD and CBG, I believe, as well, in some early research done on like rodents and things like that, that it's being helpful with. But where I'm at right now is I like to make it very clear, like when I talk about a study, it is either a human study or it's a mouse or it's a cell study. And so there are cell studies which lead to the mouse studies. And yes, they have shown that it is helping with things. But in the world of neurodegenerative disorders, I'm not going to go and tell anyone, hey, take CBD or take THC, because it's also saying a neurodegenerative disorder is kind of, again, like saying food or, drinking liquid. It's a very vague thing, and there's a spectrum. And I think that there's genetics that are involved with that. There's lifestyle that's involved with that. So it's really hard to pinpoint even now with all of the science and technology and medicine that is available. They're still having a hard time treating those things. And I know that the cannabis research is out there on it, but I don't know if anyone has tried to mimic cannabis with like a synthetic or something like that to be able to minimize those symptoms, because there already is things like Marinol, which is a synthetic version of THC. And I feel that some of those people probably have already tried smoking cannabis. And if it were to really have the long-term lasting type of benefit, that they would be using more of it. And I think maybe it's also because a lot of people that are in those situations, they're afraid to use it because they grew up during the war on drugs and the DARE era. So that could be another reason. Like, I don't know personally anyone that has Alzheimer's or Parkinson's. I don't know a single person. I've seen them on TV, I've seen them on the news, but I don't know any of these people. So again, between the lack of research and not really working with anyone directly, it's hard to speak on it. But there is a lot of promise because of the ability of these cannabinoids to modulate so many different neurotransmitters and work at different cell receptors. So
Yeah.
that's not the answer you were looking for. I know that, but I'm very careful with things that I can't pinpoint to any bit of research on.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you a quick question while we're talking about kind of these subjects before we move on. Because I was just thinking about myself, and I think a lot of folks in the audience out there, they like using cannabis and caffeine together. People call it, like, what do they call it? Like the pothead speedball or something like that, where, I found myself, I like, smoking a joint or hitting the vape or whatever it is in the morning and drinking some coffee and kind of getting to this, what I feel like internally is like some sort of level state. But I wonder if I'm just like tricking myself into making this all work. I don't know. What do you think about what's actually going on there? Because I feel like it helps me with my ADD, but I don't know if I'm just tricking myself.
So I'll put this in probably the most relatable term possible. Let's talk about the entourage effect before I answer this. Okay. So the entourage effect was not even coined a phrase until a study that was done back in 98 or 99. And I'm going to read you, it's 2-AG, 2-arachidonoglycerol, an entourage effect, inactive fatty acid glycol esters enhance 2-AG activity. So if you want to Google that, it's an older study, but what the entourage effect stems from our own body, not cannabis. Because in this study, they were looking at the way 2-AG specifically worked at CB receptors. And they were using, I believe, pig spleen. And what they found is that when 2-AG was released, that there were these other endocannabinoid-like compounds that were also present, but those compounds did not bind to the receptor like 2-AG. So what they did is they measured the affinity or the strength of 2-AG at the receptor. Then they took away those other cannabinoid-like compounds, and the affinity or the strength of 2-AG went down. Then they threw them back into the equation and it went back up. Okay. So this is a phrase that is thrown around very lightly. And I think it's almost been like romanticized that the more you take, the better it is type of thing. I don't buy that. I think there's perfectly good reason for isolated compounds because they're very targeted. Okay. So this concept that when you take our 50-50 CBD and CBG, that's what you found you like. It's good for being clear-headed. Okay. I enjoy the 50-50 for more pain and focus. I just noticed that it does a better job of that for me. Whereas if I just want to go to bed, I'm taking CBD only because there's plenty of sleep studies, and at 400 or 500 milligrams, you're not going to be put to sleep, but when you get there, you're going to stay there and have some of the best sleep ever when you take a effective dose. So here we are talking about taking these different cannabinoids. A lot of people say that if you eat an edible that has some CBD in it, that it will minimize the effects of THC. Actually, there's very little research on humans to show that, but there is human research to show that a 20 or I think it was like 40 milligram dose of THC with like a 600 milligram dose of CBD, that the CBD slows down the metabolism of the THC, allowing that delta 9 to be in your system and last longer. So you can actually get much higher on a high dose of CBD with a low dose of THC. And I say low, a moderate dose, 10 to 20 milligrams or up to 40 milligrams. So with all that being said, we're talking about the way these compounds work together. Well, my coffee in here is 100% going to play a role in how I feel when I take these two things together. It doesn't mean that my coffee is lighting up CB2 receptors or acting like those other cannabinoid-like compounds coming in and making them more potent or less potent. It just means that over here, I have a drug doing one thing, and the most addictive drug in the world that is legal everywhere that I understand is doing something else completely different over here. So you can look at it as like the nootropic type of thing. You know, if you were to take like real what is it, the 5-HT, the supplement of basically serotonin, if you were to take a bunch of that and light up a joint, you're going to feel differently than if you were to take melatonin and that. So, you know, it's not necessarily that they're working together. It's just that they're lighting up different things at the same time. If you want to call that an entourage effect, great. You can call it whatever you want. If you take a giant chocolate fucking brownie just filled with sugar and high fruct and you smoke a joint before you go to bed, you're probably not going to go to bed. It doesn't mean that, you know, like your weed isn't going to make you sedative. It just means you've got like 100+ milligrams of sugar straight to the dome, an increase in your blood sugar, and you know you're not going to be ready to go to bed. So that is an explanation of the entourage effect, how it got coined, as well as the answer to your question, all combined.
That's awesome.
I like that because one of the things that we kind of talk about on the show is that, you know, different cultivars themselves are like keys, and your body and how you respond to them is like kind of like the lock. And so how that key fits in and whether it turns you in the way you need it to depends on you and your chemistry in itself. And so that kind of plays into that whole idea of entourage. And we're talking very specifically now about cannabinoids, and part of that entourage stuff is so unknown to us in a scientific field because we've got volatile sulfur compounds, we've got esters, we've got cannabinoids, terpenes, and now they're even finding new compounds that also may play a role in how all of this interacts with us. And it's like, I think DJ Short once said the highest he ever gotten off weed was off a 7% cultivar. And so,
because it had
I
a
think,
terpene profile that was probably like 3 or 4% compared to the sub 1% that you're going to get in a dispensary, maybe 2% that you'll see today. Yeah. Now, through inhalation, I 100% agree that the terpenes are definitely playing a role. But when it comes to digestion and edibles, I think, and based off of the research I've done, because there is no clinical trial out there that I'm aware of that's saying, hey, you group take this isolated edible and you group take this terpene rich edible and, you know, create these different environments and settings to influence how they feel. But based on the research I have done, inhalation, I would say this: consumption determines function. What you're consuming, how you're consuming it, how much you're consuming, what things are you consuming together, and then when are you consuming it will ultimately determine how you're going to function and how you're going to feel. When I say when, I mean you could smoke a joint that's supposed to make you super uppity at 11:30 at night after a 12-hour workday, and you're going to fall asleep. Or you smoke so often that whenever you smoke, you just get stoned. You skip the high. You skip the high and the low, and you just go right to just like a mellow. It doesn't matter what you take because your tolerance is so high, which happens with a lot of people. So now it's like, is there such thing as an indica or a sativa or an upper or a downer? Does terpene profile matter? I think all of these things need to be considered when talking about the effects, so to speak. Like to say across the board, this will make you feel a certain way. We got to kind of tread lightly and not be as dogmatic about these effect-based profiles.
Agreed. Totally agree with that.
Well, picking up off of that, or off the back of that, let's dive into talking a little bit about the difference between full spectrum, broad spectrum, and isolates. Because you were just talking about, there's different levels of extraction, and you were just pointing out the differences of what people should expect between smoking and CBD,
Sure.
and edibles. So yeah, I'd love to just help kind of set the table for folks, help people understand what the difference is between those things.
Yeah. So what I would say first is that generally when you're hearing the terms full spectrum, broad spectrum, or isolate, we're talking about ingestible products. So orally consumed tinctures, gummies, mints, pot brownies, it doesn't matter what it is, not dabbable, vapable, or smokable products. So keep that separate. So we're not inhaling any of these terms, we're swallowing them. So with that being said, full spectrum is just become a completely bastardized term that means nothing anymore. Broad spectrum is that same bastardized term that just doesn't have any THC. And isolate is a completely isolated compound that is 99% plus pure. So now let's go back. The reason I say that full spectrum is a bastardized term is because right now you can go and buy a CBD tincture. I'm not going to say what website. And on the front, it says 10 milligrams, or maybe it'll say 5,000 milligrams, but it's like a 10 milligram dose of full spectrum hemp oil. And when you look at the back, those two things you'll say. One, it has CBD isolate, and it's basically dissolved in hemp seed oil. And they're calling that full spectrum. Or you will see CBD isolate with like echinacea oil or rosemary oil. And because now they're throwing some essential oils or terpenes into the mix, they're calling it full spectrum. I think that the definition of full spectrum in any type of isolated or any type of extracted form that would then be consumed orally and swallowed would be rosin that would then be put into some type of edible. The reason I say rosin is because you are extracting the most you can out of the parts of the plant that matter, which would be the trichomes. You're doing so with minimal heat and then pressure, and you're getting the plant's most natural profile you possibly could. I guess another thing you could do would be like bubble hash and then putting that into an edible. And most rosin now is made with the bubble hash instead of the flower anyway. And so what that full spectrum is everything that the plant has to offer within the trichome heads themselves. And that's going to be where your cannabinoids, your terpenes, and a lot of these other compounds that we're talking about. So broad spectrum is now going to be processed and distilled and isolated. Chromatography. There's a bunch of different ways, I guess, that you can, again, I'm not the extract expert here, but you basically have a as natural of a plant profile possible, but it has zero THC. And then isolate is taking everything and just breaking it down into basically a nice final powder crystal, and that is your isolated material. Now, a lot of people say that full spectrum is better, but you're going to tell me that CBD isolate mixed with echinacea oil or rosemary oil is going to be better than just taking this straight? I don't think so. And the other reason that people also think that full spectrum is better is because it has THC. Wow, I just realized how red I am. It is warm in here. A lot of people say the full spectrum, because it has THC, is superior, but really it just determines like the quality of it is going to be based off, not the quality, the potency of it is going to be based off of how much THC are you actually getting. Because there's a lot of full spectrum products out there that are delivering maybe 2 or 3 plus milligrams of THC per dose. And they are incredibly effective full spectrum products because there's a ton of research that shows that just 2.5 milligrams of THC is incredibly beneficial. And that's what Sativex is, which has had plenty of clinical trials and has been used for many years now and is available in like 20 some, almost 30 countries, I believe. And that's an actual plant extract base. It's a 1-to-1 of CBD to THC. And so is that full spectrum? Sure. If I were to take like our coconut oil with isolate and mix it with our 3-comp and have 3 compounds together and then drizzle a little THC in there and some isolated terpenes, I could call that essentially full spectrum. So there's no definition other than it can have up to 0.3% THC. So that's kind of the 3 different categories. But at the end of the day, what matters is the active compound and how much of that you're taking. So they're going to be the 2 things that matter most. So whether you're taking isolated products like ours, where we've got a tub of 50,000 milligrams of CBD and 50,000 milligrams of CBG with 940 milligrams per teaspoon, this is going to be a lot more effective than a full spectrum 10 milligram CBD hemp extract.
Yes. And I would also say that I've noticed that when I make RSO of a cultivar that I'm very familiar with smoking with, even though the terpenes and a lot of that stuff's been kind of cooked off in the process, removed in the process, I still get the very similar effects from the edible that I do smoking the flower. So it makes me think how much of that other stuff plays into it, or how much of it is just the raw chemistry of the cannabinoids that are being extracted from the cultivar.
Yeah, and the other thing is that when you are ingesting terpenes, for example, that's the biggest category that people are saying that creates this, effect with edibles. Like the idea of an indica edible or a sativa edible is kind of like it's laughable because by the time that gets put into a little gummy, the terpenes, which people are saying are creating this effect outside of the cannabinoids, they're destroyed. A lot of them are destroyed in extraction. A lot of people are using distillate anyway for their gummies and stuff because biting into a super, like a rosin-based edible is kind of hard to get down. Like unless it's like THC side, it's probably fine because you're using such a small, tiny bit. But on the CBD side of like a rosin, I mean, to get an effective dose of CBD, you're going to taste nothing but bitter cannabinoids and terpenes in there. Okay. Now, so let's say, regardless of what type of terpene that you get, once it hits your mouth, it starts breaking down even further with your saliva. And then when you swallow it, your stomach acid destroys these terpenes. Now, there was a study done on in vitro, so think of it in a test tube, where they recreated the stomach acid profile of a human and they introduced terpenes to it. And then they did test on it to see like what was left over. And like little was turning into like these 5 or 6 different types of metabolites because of the way it was getting broken down. And then your liver gets a hold of it and does the same thing. So your saliva is destroying them, your stomach acid is destroying them, and then metabolizing them into different structures. Then your liver, just like THC, how it takes that delta 9 and turns it into 11-hydroxy, that same type of thing is happening with a lot of these terpenes. And then for whatever may be left over, it does get absorbed systemically and can interact with these receptors. Do you have enough of that for it to do anything is the first question. The second question is it enough for it to do anything noticeable above the incredible potency of THC at CB1 receptors, which is running the show?
Right.
Yeah. Beta caryophyllene is there's mixed data, but it's said to be a CB2 receptor partial agonist. Well, THC is as well. So if you smoke something that has beta caryophyllene, THC is going to dominate that receptor. more so than the beta caryophyllene. And then on top of that, the CB1 receptors over here getting lit up galore by the THC. So are you really going to feel that much of a difference? And is the beta caryophyllene in there going to do much? And how, if it could, how much would you need for it to really have a significant effect that's going to dominate the effects of delta 9 or 11 hydroxy THC in an edible sense, which we all know is significantly stronger?
It's super interesting to hear you talk about this because I was asking you comments on your questions on your post about this because we about 6 months ago we interviewed iPoppy, which is an extractor here in California. We interviewed him and Huckleberry Hill Farms because we're starting to see out here in the West Coast in California these full extract gummies, and they're winning awards. They won for Whitethorn Rose, which has a particular taste to it. I like to describe it as like a strawberry oatmeal kind of taste.
Okay.
And so that's where they're doing exactly what you're talking about, rosin gummies, and they're winning awards for it. I think it's probably the effect of the THC plus the there is that kind of unique taste to it. But anyways, I was just thinking it'd be fun to get you two on an episode and make you guys fight it out. But before we do that, we have
Awesome.
our last section of the episode, or last 15 minutes or so of the show. We wanted to talk a little bit more about cannabinoids, or isolated cannabinoids, I should say. I'm excited about this kind of topic because when we were talking to you guys before, I hadn't really thought about combining your isolate with something that I might grow, because it's, one of the things I was talking about on that first episode was like, it's really hard to find as a home grower. It's hard to find cultivars that have high CBG or even have high CBD. Frankly, it's pretty hard, even though I'm in a medical market, or sorry, a rec market, and it's still hard to find that stuff. So I was excited that, like you were saying earlier, I can go to you guys and source these isolates and then add it to some of the strains that I love or whatever. But yeah, let's start off with the king of all cannabinoids, isolated cannabinoids. Can you talk about THC and how that works in the body, potential benefits, how that kind of interacts in your system?
I will, but I want to respond to your last comment before the segue, which is saying fight it out.
Yeah.
So I get like excited when I talk about this stuff, but I don't care to be wrong. Being wrong in this space does not bother me. I've been wrong way too many times, because all the things that most people say about this plant, I used to say until I started doing a lot of the research. And the thing is the very notion of something saying up or down or sleep or tired or arouse or all these different names that are used to describe these products, just that alone is enough to plant the seed of placebo and create that expectation. And because we've been told in this industry that certain things are act a certain way, and that's that. And if you question it, you're going to get shit talked on social media like I have for years. We're just prone to be like, just accept it. Oh, this is going to make me feel this way. Oh, it's better. Okay, cool. Oh, okay, cool. Like, that's it. It's just enough. Placebo is the most potent drug in the world. There's an awesome article from Harvard called The Placebo Phenomenon, where they compared placebo versus placebo, but the only thing that changed was how the doctors talk to the patients. Both with placebo, some people doing phenomenal with the same sugar pill over here. Other people over here are like having night terrors and had to drop out of the study because the same sugar pill, because how it was delivered to them was enough to cause nocebo, which is shall cause harm. So anytime you want to have a debate with someone, I'm all about it. All I can say is I have to rely on the research, because that's just where I've come. Give it to me in black and white. I understand the anecdotal, and a lot of it goes against what we talk about. A lot of people say that they're miraculously cured by 10 milligrams of CBD. Sorry, the research doesn't support it. That's got to be placebo. Anyway, it's a cool drug. You should try it. Placebo. It's cheap too, sometimes. Okay, so going on to THC. THC is a powerhouse. And the reason it's a powerhouse is because of all the cannabinoids naturally in the plant, especially at the rate that the plant produces THC. A little bit of it can go a really long way, and a lot of it can go a different direction. Okay. So at the root of it, THC is a CB1 receptor partial agonist. Okay. So that means that it is able to really light up those CB1 receptors in our central nervous system, and that can create the intoxicating or high type of feeling. Real quick, Marinol, which is the synthetic THC, also goes by drobaninol or something, is a full agonist. And although it's a synthetic, people say that the reason people don't respond to it as well is because it's synthetic. Well, it's a full agonist. So what happens is some people, like, it's given to AIDS and HIV patients for appetite, as well as for cancer patients for nausea. So it is much stronger, the synthetic form. So people sometimes don't respond to it. And, like, 10 milligrams of regular THC is going to be very different than 10 milligrams of Marinol. So anyway, so THC, it targets CB1 receptors. But again, like I mentioned earlier, you also have other G protein coupled receptors that it's interacting with. You have TRP receptors, which are basically pain and pressure receptors. So capsaicin topically will desensitize these receptors by overstimulating it. That's what THC can also do. That's why I think it helps with a lot of people with pain, is after regular use and constantly essentially hitting those receptors and turning them on, now they're desensitized to that pain stimuli. You've got serotonin receptors and GABA receptors, which is why it can help people with various types of, potentially help people with mood disorders, because a lot of them are directly correlated to neurotransmitter release. And then there is, let's see, various hormones and things that it interacts with as well. So a lot of these other cannabinoids do the same thing. They interact with these same receptors as THC, but THC has the ability to light up those CB1 receptors and make you feel high. What's also interesting, though, is that a small dose of THC, one that you don't feel any high at all, can also be doing the exact same thing. So you can have just enough in you, but not feel that intoxication that comes along with it. And you can still have that therapeutic and medicinal side effect.
And so, just to kind of keep things moving fastly, because we're winding up here, let's go ahead and talk about CBD, its benefits, and also if you could kind of talk about that problem of sourcing high quality CBD products, because I think that's a big problem in the market today.
Yeah. CBD does everything that I just said a little bit differently. So the way CBD is going to work with these receptors, it's not like THC. It doesn't come in and dock on the CB1 receptor and light things up. At the CB receptor, there's kind of mixed data on what type of cell specifically with the receptor of how it will interact with it. But one of the things I find very interesting that CBD can do is extend the life of our endogenous cannabinoids. So, for example, anandamide, when your body produces that on demand, it is then broken down by something called FAAH, F-A-A-H. So anandamide is created, FAAH comes in, gobbles it up, and breaks it down and essentially recycles it. Well, CBD comes in and slows down FAAH, allowing our own endogenous cannabinoids to last longer. So anandamide does directly bind to CB1 and CB2 receptors. So by taking CBD, you're essentially creating THC in a sense in your body, but without that intoxicating type of experience. CBD, I mentioned earlier, the various types of hormones and other receptors that it can benefit. It's anything from sleep, helping with anxiety, helping with tremors, helping people focus. There are a lot of other claims out there about like really severe illnesses and symptoms that does lack a lot of research, but the one big one over there would be seizure disorders, and the various ways that it is able to prevent or completely significantly reduce the amount and the intensity and the duration of seizures. I think that that's probably one of the most fascinating things, because there's a lot of other illnesses and symptoms that you can live with. I live with herniated disc and a crooked spine and I won't even go through all my issue. I can live with that. I can function on a day to day. I'm not going through minutes or, even longer of a seizure. So I think that that is the most fascinating thing about CBD, is giving people that ability to drastically improve the quality of their life for such a severe thing. But then you got people that they just can't sleep. And then they start taking a 2, 3, 400 milligram dose, and all of a sudden they're sleeping normally and they're like totally back to, let's say, normal. They're back to par. So there's a huge spectrum of what these compounds can do. And with that lies the complications, because it's so hard to pinpoint exactly how much someone should take for what symptom. And that's why, one of your questions, and I'll answer it now, was like, what types of research am I excited about in the future with like new discoveries? I'm not. Stop looking for more and investigate and research what we know we have. Fucking focus on CBD galore. Every single thing you could throw at it, get some placebo and controlled studies together, clinical trials, and let people know this much does this for this group of adults with minimal side effects. Like, that would be the most helpful thing possible, is just better understand what we know. Now, focusing to your next question of what to take and how do you know the quality, the reality is a lab test is going to tell you that. You want to find a company. If you ever come across a company that doesn't have their lab test on their website, don't buy from them. It's that simple.
That's
if you
good
notice
advice.
if you notice the lab test is 3 years old, just email them, ask them for an updated one. If they don't have it, that's a problem. Okay. So, and it's generally third party. If we don't get, our labs aren't done from future compounds. They're done elsewhere, third party type of thing. So lab tests, and make sure you get one that's testing for pesticides and heavy metals and the things like that. At the end of the day, we're coming down to working with an isolated compound. So there might be a tiny, tiny, tiny little bit of like CBDV left over in here. But this, for the most part, is a pure compound. And so with that, it's generally very, very safe. If you're buying isolates, as long as it doesn't have crazy chemicals and things left over, then those pesticides and all those other things are going to be remediated through this process as well. From there, it's not so much about the quality, because you could take really crappy mold infested biomass and break it all down and get just as clean of CBD isolate as you would some premium flower from the dispensary or an organic farm or something like that. So more importantly than beyond the quality of the lab tests, it's all about the dose. If you're taking 10 milligrams of CBD and you don't have a significant amount of THC at the same time, it's not doing anything. So if you want to benefit from having CBD only or non-intoxicating cannabinoids only or THC free, doesn't matter if it's broad spectrum, if there's echinacea oil, terpenes added or anything like that. What matters is the minimally effective dose for adults, which based on the research is anywhere from 200 to 400 milligrams daily, depending on the size of the person. I'm 185 pounds, so I'm closer to that 400 to 500 milligram mark. But if someone's, $110, 200 might do the trick. Hey, even a single gummy with 150 may do the trick. But the most important thing about the everything when it comes to cannabinoids is, are you taking an effective amount?
So, I know we're just about out of time, and I want to get you back to whatever you've got going on in your day. We really appreciate your time today. This has been really just helpful and informational. I love what you're talking about in terms of effective dosages in particular, and it's really great. But before I let you go, I want to just pin you down real quick and make you answer real quick. What does CBG do, and how does that help some? Why is it in the CBD gummies? Why should I take it? I'd just love to give people a little bit more context on CBG.
Sure. So from what I can gather on CBG based off of some of the human studies is it kind of falls in between THC and CBD in the sense of the dose needed. I've seen some iffy studies that were in that 20 to 50 milligram mark showing benefit for anxiety. I just don't know how good the study was performed and or if it's been duplicated elsewhere. It's newer in the sense of the research based off of a lot of the anecdotal experience that people have, and why when we do when CBG is included in our products, it's usually at the same amount as the CBD, or in our 3-comp, it's like CBD, CBG, CBN. Would some of the benefits, I think the coolest thing is the clear-headedness aspect of it. We have so many people that take these on their way to work. It's not a fall asleep type of thing. Like I said earlier, I can take CBD at night and I'm out. If I take my 50-50 with CBG at night, I'm not out. I'm more like, I'm not in my head in a bad way, but I'm focused. Like I could stay up and watch movies for quite some time. During the workday, I used to really enjoy smoking CBG flower when I had a good source of it. We know a lot of people that will dab the CBG isolate because it's an immediate effect. And the reason the dabbing of the isolate is really good is for people who suffer from any type of stomach issue, GI distress, Crohn's disease. We've heard a lot of people explain that it's been really beneficial for that. Now, is that because there was a study on a mouse showing it was beneficial for GI distress years ago, and that's what kind of prompted it? Maybe, I don't know. But, there comes a point where regardless of how someone is feeling, if they're feeling better, regardless of what they're taking and how much they're taking, if they're feeling better, we're happy. Like, we're very happy if people are feeling better with a 10 milligram dose of CBD. That's really good because we don't want people to feel ill. We just want to make sure that they can take some that's based off of the research that we know, but it's also affordable. This is 100,000 milligrams of CBD and CBG. The CBD only, I don't have that one on me. 100,000 milligrams of CBD in coconut oil. It's $100. It's $99. Most people are selling like a 5,000 milligram tincture for that same amount in the sense of the cost. if you're lucky, yeah. And then they throw full spectrum and they throw some rose oil or something in there, whatever. But so we want people to feel better, but we want to make sure they're getting the doses. So what I always tell people with the isolates in our formulations is start with CBD only. It's cheaper. Start with that only as a baseline. What does 400 milligrams a day or 500 milligrams a day feel like for you? Then, if you're curious about getting into like the 50-50, which is exactly that, a 1-to-1 ratio, then start taking this at that same milligram total dosage. Do you feel better or the same? If you feel the same, don't waste your money spending more. Just use the CBD. Or the 3-comp, which also has CBN in it. Do you go over to this? Okay, did it make any bit of a difference? If it did, then there's your sweet spot. If it didn't, then stick to the CBD only formulation. So that's how I recommend. Like, yeah, a lot of people are like, oh, well, I want to get the 3-comp because there's CBN in there, there's CBG, I've heard good things. Sure, you can try it, but it's like more than double the price of what the CBD is. So maybe just try that first and focus on the dosing being the important aspect with the CBD, because so many people have taken CBD and it hasn't done jack all for them. So that's another reason why they want more compounds. And it's not that more is better in the sense of compounds, more is better in the sense of the milligrams that you're getting into your system.
Well, while we are wrapping up here before we get kind of to the final shout outs, can you go ahead and give us a little overview of CBN and some of its benefits to our health?
I think one of the coolest things with CBN seems to be with inflammation. There's studies on it. A lot of people think that CBN is going to increase appetite like THC. It may be able to do it a little bit, slightly. There's some interesting topical studies that have been going on for like psoriasis and eczema that I find very interesting as well, and very significant results with that. I believe it's a Canadian pharmaceutical company that's been working with CBN for that. As a whole, CBN is claimed to be a sedative. There is no research that shows, and Ethan Russo talks about this, there's no like sleep receptor that CBN comes in and docks to and puts you to sleep. For the most part, where the sedative nature of CBN came into play was older cannabis And I mean old, not like a couple months old, much older, like 2+ years, like the brickweed we used to get back in the day. We found out that it's higher in CBN. And so that higher CBN, because of the age, people associate with a more sedative experience. But really, I think what's happened is those terpenes that used to be more stimulating left the building. So you're not getting it's not that you're getting a sedative, you're just not getting maybe those stimulants involved with it. Um, we do, though, have a lot of people that take it at night and they say it helps them sleep, but they're taking it at night. We have with our cosmic gummies, we have a night and a day. And the reason why we do that is because it's helping people, give them a little bit of guide, a little bit of a placebo, power suggestion, take this during the day, take this at night, and the CBN is there. So we've also, I don't want to say jumped on the bandwagon of the CBN sedativeness, but when you're dealing with a product that's got 3 different compounds on there, most people don't know how to spit what CBD is and explain CBG, and no one knows how these are all interacting. So that's where I do think some of the products on the edible side that can give a little bit of a guide in the sense of like, this can help you feel this way, or maybe take this here
Like a
or
use
take
case
this
or something.
here.
Yeah.
Exactly. It can be helpful for them. At the same time, you could take our all night cosmic gummies that are 10 milligrams of THC, hemp derived, as well as CBN and CBD. You could take those waking up in the morning. You'll probably be just fine. You're not going to fall right back to sleep. And you could take the day ones in the evening and you'd be totally fine as well. So, but yeah, CBN, again, there's less research on it. It's hard to point to a lot of the things, but the biggest thing would be promoting sleep, because that's what we're told, pain relief, anti-inflammatory, and then also with the appetite stimulation.
Awesome. Well, this has been a really great episode today. I really appreciate your time. We had a lot of great comments in the chat. I'll make a comment myself, and before I throw it over for you for your last shout outs. But I just wanted to thank you, by the way. I've been using, like I mentioned at the top of the show, I'll just kind of give a use case. I had to fly to go do like training at a work situation in an office, and it was basically like being in a classroom again, which is, I don't really work well in classrooms. It's kind of why I dropped out of college. So going to that, and I was like, anxious and all this kind of stuff, and I was using your CBD CBG gummies, and I just found it to be really, really helpful. And then when I came home, I was sharing them with my wife, and she found that it was helpful for her when she was really stressed out about whatever. So I highly suggest people check out futurecompounds.com.
Thank you.
The pricing in terms of like the high dosage versus, per dollar is just, you can't even find anything in this ballpark, man. Like I was looking around at the dispensaries in my town, and it's like what, $50 for 500 milligrams probably of CBD, split out into 10 milligram pills or something like that. It's just not even comparable. So really check out, or highly suggest checking out Future Compounds. And then before I throw it to you, Brandon, I also want to shout out everyone in our audience. We had people that are watching on the live stream, and they thanked you for you sharing your knowledge here. We had Devil's Leaf 44 said lots of great info. Sativa Sierra said thank you, appreciate the info. Shout out to Richard and Tom Holland, and everyone else out in the CannaBuzz community.
Tom Holland.
Everyone out there for helping support CannaBuzz and keeping the train rolling. But any other shout outs, Brandon, that you'd like to have before we let you go?
I just want to shout out to you guys for making this happen and for focusing on education and knowledge and just keeping people on their toes with different things to think about. One of the worst things for a person or society as a whole is the unwillingness to unlearn. It's that simple. If you're unwilling to unlearn, it's easy to change your mind if you get rid of your ego and you just look at things at face value and be like, wow, it's not that I have to think of it or feel about something in this particular way. You've shown me some facts, and I'm going to change my mind. I've changed my mind a lot, and I will change my mind continuously. So having conversations like this with different people is what allows that to happen. So thanks for putting the podcast together and being a positive influence on our community as a whole, because I jokingly say there is no cannabis community. There's just a bunch of individual communities, and they all hate each other and like talking shit nonstop. So environments like this
That's so
Environments
true,
like this are
bro.
what matter. Yeah,
And
this is what matters.
I gotta tell you, navigating some of that stuff can be a little treacherous at times. And so when we get guests like you that are extremely knowledgeable and extremely willing to not come on here and pitch a spiel, but educate people, level people up, and help them find solace and healing in the plant. And so for that, we do thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
well said.
appreciate your comment. It's funny. I was watching some other YouTube channels in our space the other day, and some of them are turning into like drama channels and all kinds of stuff. And I'm like, I just care about growing weed and learning about weed. So I appreciate you being a part of that experience. JR, thank you so much for putting together the questions today and sending that over
Yeah,
to Brandon ahead of time. We really appreciate your efforts as well. Thanks to everyone in the CannaBuzz community for your support. Your monthly support as a member helps us keep going. It's going to send JR to the Dude Grows Cup, the Emerald Cup, whenever they announce that thing. They haven't announced it yet, so I'm guessing it's happening later in the year. We'll see. But otherwise, thank you so much for your time today, Brandon. Everyone should check out Future Compounds. And as always, JR,
Growers love.
peace, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.